Well, Chris, thanks so much for being on the show today. Your passion is to help people take back control of their health. And so I want to talk about it. You got a doctorate in physical therapy, that sort of thing. But I'm curious when health and fitness went from like a personal desire of your own life to something that you now spend your life like helping others improve in.
Yeah, thanks, Dylan. It's great to be here this morning and excited to be able to connect and talk over some things. Yeah, for me, it really started, very young. I was a pretty active kid with three younger brothers, so we were all over the place. And sports kind of led to health. And the more I learned about the human body and did some different things in my own life in regards to just performance and whatnot, that kind of led me to a natural transition to physical therapy and. Then once I got into the clinic and spent some time also in home health, and I just recognized at that point that a lot of our nutritional guidance was just broken. People had no idea. I might have been there for helping them with a knee replacement, shoulder replacement, coming off of a heart attack, and they just had no idea how to eat properly. And it
Yeah.
really kind of opened my eyes to a lot of the brokenness that we're experiencing right now, kind of across the healthcare and health sphere in this country. And so just kind of decided to take a little bit different approach to what I was doing and kind of left traditional healthcare in a sense. And kind of here we are today, a few years later, trying to build something that looks very foreign to what I
Yeah.
thought I was getting myself into a few years ago.
I, I'm curious. So you're getting trained kind of like the traditional route. At what point did you kind of decide or figure out like the nutritional guidelines and stuff you were learning was that actually like not what's actually best for like the human body? Was it in your training? Was it separately? How did that come for you?
Yeah, to be honest, I mean, I had a pretty strong foundation in undergrad on the nutritional side of things. And then I got to physical therapy school and we discussed it very little. And
Mm,
I was still training and doing a lot of things on my own. And I was sort of just puzzled as to like, why are we not talking about nutrition? And it just was something that was kind of overlooked. And, we sort of put health in their own individual kind of boxes, so to speak, of, the orthopedics do this and the nutritionists do this and the physical therapists do this. And we've sort of disconnected, the holistic approach to health. And that always kind of didn't make sense to me.
mm,
And when I saw how hard it was for people to get results, when I actually was working with them individually after I graduated, then it really started to not make sense. And, the more you kind of bring questions up, you're kind of told almost you can't talk about this and we shouldn't be giving protein guidelines and things like that. And again, that's where I really started to lose a lot of confidence in what I was doing and the way and the approach that we were directing patients and directing clients because there was just this huge gap that wasn't being filled and it was people were suffering as a result of that.
yeah. So I want to talk about kind of this some of this health stuff, nutrition, exercise, because you're like super practical, super helpful. But just to catch us up though, kind of like how did you go from maybe the doctorate physical therapy helping clients to what you're doing now, like the more online, the 90 days to health? You can talk about that too. Like how did you go from that to what you're doing today?
Yeah, so I again in the middle of the pandemic, I got very frustrated. Just fully transparent, I realized that again, it wasn't just what I was doing, but just as a whole, I had lost a lot of confidence. And my brother and I, who is also a doctor of physical therapy, my youngest brother, him and I started having some conversations, in 2020, 2021, just trying to figure out, what are we doing? This doesn't make sense. We need to figure out how to build. We had kind of gone through a bit of a health transformation ourselves. He was a college basketball player. I played college sports and then raced for a number of years on the Ironman circuit. And you kind of get into the rat race, and you start to all of a sudden, we had our first child, and just the busyness of life. And I was recognizing like I was starting to even neglect my health, and I saw that happening with a lot of my friends, a lot of my family. And so we just decided like we've got to build a system for ourselves. And that really started with nutrition. And the more that we did that ourselves, the more we realized like this could be applied to everyone. Like there's
Yeah.
just so much misinformation or conflicting information out there that if we just simplify health, I think we can help a lot of people. And so that's kind of where, one thing led to another, and we started putting out some information online, and it's very slow at first, and it
Right.
took a lot of energy and effort to kind of get that snowball effect going. But eventually we recognized that that message was resonating with a lot of people. Originally it was geared more towards, fathers and men, because we could relate very strong with them. And then from there we realized like this is something that works for everybody. So,
Right.
we've obviously got a number of females, we've got people in their 30s, people in their 80s, and if we can just simplify health, then we can really make some pretty drastic changes in the overall landscape of health in this country.
Yeah, I think it's helpful too because I think like some of the like for example some of the people that I follow online, like nothing against it, but like single guys, and it's like I'm married with kids. Like you're like what you eat and your meal prep, I'm like that's not. I mean, I guess it is if I wanted to like eat my own thing. Like it just is hard, and so to have like a more like practical average person life to do. So I always get into this. I know this is a big question, but what would you say some of the biggest issues are with the standard American diet? Specifically, like what we're told is like a balanced diet, quote unquote. Like, what are the issues with what we're told we should eat normally?
Yeah, so I think first of all, it comes down to it literally just creates a blood sugar roller coaster all day long. We don't eat enough protein. The standard guidelines are, if you look at the percentages, it's telling us to eat 50 or 60 grams of protein a day. And as far as I'm concerned, we can survive doing that, but we're not going to thrive. We're going to end up in a position where we're consuming way too many calories and we're spiking our blood sugar and crashing our blood sugar all day long. And as a result, it's kind of just fueling inflammation. And I always say we're very good at consuming and storing fats and carbs. We're not very good at being able to take in protein consistently. And as a result, that kind of sets us up for this, really skewed diet that, we've got guys that, they work out 4 or 5 times a week and they're just like, I can't make any progress. And then you look at what they're eating and it's like, well, you're basically in survival mode. And then you're introducing all of this stress on your body from exercise and you can't catch up. You can't build muscle. And you certainly aren't going to be, taking advantage of all that time and energy. So that just leads to more frustration and a lot of times injury as well.
Yeah, I don't know. I remember growing up like the food pyramid was like really big. It's like grains is like the I guess which would be a lot of carbs is like the biggest thing. I just off the top of your head like how would you? Oh, it goes to the next question too. Like the most I know this is individual maybe stage of life gender could impact this a little bit, but like the most sustainable way to eat like how should we be thinking in terms of like just like the big buckets in terms of our diet?
Yeah, so I guess in general, I think trying to focus on, you mentioned earlier, like looking at your day and everybody's day is so different and you have a lot more responsibilities and things like that. So personally, I like just putting breakfast and lunch on autopilot to a certain extent, where it's like I've got 2 or 3 options with breakfast, 2 or 3 options with lunch, and I can make sure that I'm getting, I use the target, and this is true pretty much for everyone, I would say, is 30 grams of protein minimum is let's hit that as a minimum target. There's certainly benefits of a lot more than that
Per meal, you're
with
saying?
each meal. For
Yeah.
each meal, yeah. So I kind of use that as my guideline of hitting at least 30, and we don't probably don't need to get into this too much today, but things like the protein to calorie ratio, like understanding, how much protein am I getting in versus the number of calories that I'm consuming in this food, and we like to use the idea of like 10 to 1. So if you're looking at a nutritional label and you look at calories per serving, you want to see, at least basically divide that number by 10 and at least that many grams of protein. So as simple as it's 100 calories per serving, I want to see at least 10 grams of protein. And if we're building our meals around protein sources that are at least 40%, which is going to fit that 10 to 1 ratio, then that's going to set us up pretty well for success. To be able to make sure that we're maximizing protein without letting our calories get completely out of control. Because
Right.
there's a lot of information out there. I'll use the example of like peanut butter, for instance. Is peanut butter is a great protein source because it's got 9 grams of protein on the label. But if you actually do the math on it, it's like a 15% protein food. So the vast majority of those calories are coming from fat. And again, fats are healthy. We need to eat those things, but if we're looking to lose weight, we're looking to improve blood sugar control and teach our body how to burn fat, then we probably should be, leveraging some of those foods that are much higher in protein and overall much lower in calorie count.
Yeah. So I want to talk about like kind of this meal prep, breakfast, lunch thing, and we can use me as a practical example. Before I get into this, my question is like the protein thing. I know before we started recording, I told you about 2 years ago, I started reading more about this, and like that's one of the things. Like, man, you need to eat more protein. From what you've learned or discovered, like why is like the standard American diet, like why are we taught that protein isn't that important when like if you look at like the human history, it's like that was vitally important to like health and well being.
Yeah, so a bit of, I mean, again, this is my bias, but
Yeah.
what I've kind of figured out over the years is it's usually because somebody's making more money off of those processed carbs.
Mm.
And it's at the end of the day, you look at something as simple as like grass-fed beef, which, I'd argue is one of the most nutrient dense foods available.
Mm.
But the profit margin on that is a fraction of what you'll find with things like
Yeah.
cereals and a lot of these refined grains and these processed foods. So in general, I always think about, your health's kind of up for sale. And if you're not an educated consumer, then you can kind of fall into some of these traps, choosing foods that are, again, not setting us up for success. And, we're very good now at producing calories. We've never been able to produce more calories than we are right now. So when you think about, okay, if we can produce more calories, it'd be kind of like a car manufacturer realizing they could manufacture cars more efficiently and then just refusing to sell those extra cars they can produce. The same thing is going to be said for these food manufacturers, is if they can produce calories at a very cheap rate, they're going to try to figure out how to sell those things as effectively as they can. And I think that's what we're seeing a lot now with even some of the general guidelines that have been impacted, over the years as well.
Yeah. So let's make this practical. We'll use me as a guinea pig. So for me, you tell me if this is good or bad. For breakfast every morning, I do 3 eggs and 3 pieces of bacon. Generally, I make like a big pack of bacon, whatever, and just like microwave it. And so I feel like for me breakfast, I'm like I'm pretty good on that, and like some water. Lunch is like harder because like sometimes it'll be a lot of times it's like leftovers if I don't have a lunch meeting, and like sometimes I'll like try to make sure whatever we have from dinner the night before there's like enough chicken, beef, whatever to leftover. But that's like hit or miss. So like how would you recommend someone's like, hey, if you're trying to get at least breakfast and lunch squared away routine, what are some things people should be thinking through or maybe like meal prep wise to make that happen?
Yeah, so on the meal prep side, I think you're right. With if you have kids and family and work responsibilities, sometimes that word can be a bit of a curse word. Like I don't have
Mm.
time to meal prep. I don't have time to do anything. So I really like to kind of get away from like having to prepare the whole meal. It could be something as simple as on a Sunday afternoon, I'm going to brown up a couple pounds of ground beef and I'm just going to stash it away. You could do the same thing with shrimp and chicken breasts, chicken thighs, kind of utilizing the proteins that you enjoy. And then I love leveraging things like bowls. So you think about like taco bowls, burger bowls, chicken burrito bowls, those kinds of things where we can make protein the centerpiece of the meal, and we can do it very efficiently because that protein's already cooked, and you can have you utilize your salsas and your veggies. And I'm a big Greek yogurt cottage cheese guy because it's an easy way to just load up on protein with some of those meals. And you can kind of keep those foods in your back pocket. And then to kind of go along with that, having some Swiss Army knife foods, so to speak, where you have some things that are always going to be high protein, that are going to be very satiating, and you can grab those in a pinch and they only take you a couple of minutes. So something like hard-boiled eggs. I mentioned the Greek yogurt, utilizing things like frozen berries and Greek yogurt, where it's really easy to throw that together in a couple minutes. It can be a breakfast, a lunch, even like an after dinner dessert type of thing, where you're taking advantage very efficiently in some of those things. And then, utilizing, this is where I think Brett and I come at things. Brett's my brother, by the way. Come at things a little bit different, where we're not going to get super, super strict on, if we're thinking about things like Fairlife shakes or protein bars. It's like if those are foods that we can keep in our back pocket, that maybe we're not necessarily like, they're not perfect. They're not going to be like optimal foods. But if I can grab a Fairlife shake and I can get in, 30, 35 grams of protein, and it's whatever, 180 calories, and I can take that, while I'm taking my son to soccer practice or whatever that might be. and that prevents me from, eating an entire bag of Doritos, then that's a win. And so that's where, we like just being able to have some of those things available to fill gaps every once in a while. Maybe that is a meal. Maybe you have two snacks that are high protein that can be, 40 or 45 grams of protein. And it takes you, 30 seconds to grab those couple of things and you can hit the road and do what you need to do. So I guess those would be my first thoughts on it, would just be trying to simplify the process for yourself. And you said earlier, like, you can sometimes make a meal and use it as a leftover. But anytime you're going to cook, I always say feed yourself at least one more time. So, if you're making dinner, make sure you can get a lunch out of it. Make sure you can get tomorrow night's dinner out of it. So you're not just going to be left to your own vices running through drive-through, 3 or 4 nights out of the week.
Right. So some people might be listening to this and might think, you make the assumption like they're going to get tired of eating the same things. So one of the things that's been difficult for me to like do this consistent lunch thing is like the ground beef or chicken. I'm like, yeah, I don't know. I get tired of it. So how do you do it for you? Like, I mean, maybe part of it is just like you get used to it or whatever, but like, what's your advice when it comes to eating some of these similar things over and over again? How do you combat like that pushback?
Yeah, so again, I try to use my dinners as my variety, and I'm not eating the same thing with breakfast and lunch. It's more so like I have two or three things, and it could be something too where like you use your weekends to kind of break it up. So like for us personally, I'll do a lot of eggs, chicken sausage, cottage cheese, and yogurt bowls, and then on the weekends we'll make like protein pancakes. So there's something to kind of mix it up that you can utilize so that then at the beginning of the next week, you haven't been eating the same, egg omelet, 10, 12 days in a row, that kind of thing. But
Yeah.
I will push back a little bit on the variety. And this is where I don't know exactly the best way to say this, but I think variety gets us in big trouble, because if we have too much variety, then that means we have to make, you think about, we're eating 3 meals a day, that's 21 meals a week. We have to make 21 intentional decisions in the right direction to be in a good spot. And again, we don't need to be perfect with every meal, but knowing the responsibilities, I know for us, like especially this time of year with holidays, is dinners are tricky. There's a lot of social events, there's a lot of kids' Christmas concerts and things like that.
Yeah.
So if I don't take care of the first 2 meals of the day, then I have to be even more intentional at night. So I just really like simplifying and having a bit of a system for ourselves that takes the guesswork out of it, where, we don't need to be making decisions on food 21 times a week. Because I know for me personally, decision fatigue is hard enough throughout the day with everything else that we're trying to balance with family and with work, that I don't really want to have to make decisions when it comes to food, at least, not in the first half of my day.
Yeah. So for someone who's listening to this, and obviously you're like crushing it, you're doing this, you've been doing it for a while, you got the rhythms routine. Someone who's newer, they're like, okay, high protein, like more real foods. Like for you, like on a weekend, do you meal prep? Like how do you plan for your meals for the week? What does it look like for you, like on a Sunday?
Yeah, so I mean, the first thing my wife and I do is we try to have a game plan where we have a little like chalkboard that hangs in our kitchen, and we just write out our meals for the week. And typically, again, we're not cooking every night. It's usually 3 or 4 nights out of the week, and I'll figure out, okay, what proteins are we going to be eating? If it's, Monday through Wednesday, I'll probably pull those proteins out already, because there's nothing worse than having a game plan and then realizing, oh shoot, I forgot to pull it out of the freezer. I guess we got to
Yes.
figure out something else. So, if you can have that out there for yourself, have those proteins thawed. The one thing I refuse to do is throw protein out. So it's like, if I'm going to pull it out of the fridge, I'm going to make sure this gets cooked, whether I want to or not. It's going to get done. And so I kind of create a bit of a commitment for myself there to cook just by pulling and thawing out that meat, because again, you're kind of on a time clock at that point before that stuff starts to go bad. So that's kind of where we start. And then, yeah, usually we make sure that we have some of those Swiss Army knives on hand. If you looked at our fridge, we had to get a second fridge that we put in our garage, because I think my wife got tired of me coming home with like 6 to 8 cottage cheese and Greek yogurts and taking up the whole fridge. So it's sort of become our dairy station, I guess you could call it, out there to just have those Swiss Army knives available. So we always make sure we have those things on hand. we don't we leverage a lot of places like Costco as well, so that we don't have to be going to the grocery store, 3 or 4 times a week, where we can load up, have everything we need, having some very simple options that again are protein dense. Again, these are not necessarily perfect options, but you go to Costco and place there's some like quality, it could be chicken meatballs, chicken sausage, things like they even have like these chicken bites that are 55-60% protein, which is unheard of, especially if you're as a dad you start looking at some of the labels on like kids chicken nuggets and you
Yeah.
realize, man, these things are pretty horrible. So if we can find some things that the kids like that are also high protein, now you're kind of winning on a couple different fronts. So
Yeah.
that's kind of where we start. And then, like I said, every once in a while, we're grilling up a couple pounds of ground beef or some chicken breasts, things like that. But we try not to overcomplicate it, and just really more so just have a game plan going into the week.
So I'm just curious, when you do ground beef, are you just like straight ground beef with like salt and pepper? Like, how do you eat it?
Yeah, it kind of depends. So, I mean, I have like a taco seasoning that I kind of keep on hand that I've sort of made, or I mean, you could literally just pick up a big thing of taco seasoning that you store at the house for whenever you're gonna make tacos, things like that. But yeah, with ground beef, usually I'm pretty simple with it. We get local ground beef, and it's pretty tasty on its own. So I'm pretty much just a salt and pepper guy, especially if I'm doing something like burgers. Every once in a while, yeah, I like keeping things like garlic powder, onion powder on hand as well. And that's another thing is like sometimes if you're not used to cooking, it can be a bit overwhelming.
Mhm.
There's so many resources out there that you can use for just simplify meals with crock pot recipes, utilizing things that are going to be pretty low energy but can still create some really tasty meals. And that's one of the things that Brett and I have tried to do with our community and our one-on-one clients is giving them 50 or 60 really simple food options that hit their goals, that don't take more than a few minutes to be able to throw together and turn it on, and when you get back 5 or 6 hours later it's ready to go.
Yeah. I, so I think someone who's listening to this, I think we kind of know like the whole food pyramid, eating all these carbs and grain. It's like, okay, I get that's probably not the best, but we haven't talked a lot about fruits and vegetables. So if someone's like, you're saying that you could just like literally eat a meal with like just protein, like, don't you need like fruits and vegetables as well to be healthy? What's your take on that?
Yeah, yeah, and definitely don't want people to think I'm not a carnivore guy. That's definitely not the way I build my meals out. There's certainly some benefit, especially if we're looking to improve insulin sensitivity and things like that, to back away slightly from the overall percentage of carbs and focusing more on quality carbs. I'll throw in things like potatoes and fruit would probably be my go-tos there. Sweet potatoes, regular potatoes. They're just some of the most nutrient dense carbs that's available for us. So yeah, if we're going to be building out our meals, keeping that protein as the centerpiece of the meal, and then trying to we call it the rule of half. So basically, trying to keep that to like half a potato, half a cup of a carb source can usually put people in a pretty good spot and keeps that overall portion where it needs to be. So that's one of the things we try to aim for. But yeah, there's definitely opportunities for carbs. Again, there's also some advantages to sort of an earn your carbs approach. And what I mean by that is around our workouts, around our activity level, our body's just going to be much more responsive to carbs than, at the end of the night after dinner, if we're just going to be sitting and watching Netflix or watching a sporting event or something like that. That's the time of the day when we're not going to necessarily be as responsive. So if we can be thinking about, okay, when am I going to be active? When am I going to be moving? Those are the meals where you could argue the best times for you to be able to be leveraging your carbs when your body can put it to use, rather quickly.
Yeah. So I'm curious your thoughts too. People, when they have different like eating or diets or whatever, or how they eat, like cheat days, or like kind of letting it like, it seems like if what you're kind of saying, especially if your breakfast and lunch are solid, you can be a little more flexible maybe at dinner. But how do you view like taking a day off or like whatever, the chocolate cake? How do you view those things?
Yeah, so I think I try to not create a cheat day. I try to, have it as, I guess I don't really love that title because it assumes we're making a mistake or we're
Right.
choosing to kind of fall off track. I would rather, okay, I know I'm going to have a wedding event on a Saturday night, and I'm going to get up on Saturday and I'm going to hit my typical, high protein breakfast to kick off the day. And there's so many different strategies you could incorporate where, okay, I know Saturday night's going to be maybe even a couple of drinks with that dinner, and I'm going to enjoy myself. So I'm going to load up on protein in the morning, and then I'm going to go with more of like a 2 meal approach. So I'm going to kind of bank some calories for later on in the day. Or, most importantly, it's not letting one meal turn into 2, 3, 4 unproductive meals. And that way, I think it gives people the freedom to enjoy themselves with social events and have that system that they can continue to go back to the next day. So again, you go off track on a Friday night, you choose to have a good time, and then Saturday morning, you get right back to the system that you've built for yourself with breakfast and lunch. And that way, you don't have to have the guilt tied to these cheat days. And you're also not derailing an entire day. So, again, stack an early win, get in a walk, get in a quality meal, and then enjoy yourself with family, holidays, things like that.
Yeah. So I want to ask this question. When it comes to like nutrition and health, a lot of people have opinions. So even me, the last couple of years, just reading a little bit about this stuff, like high processed foods, protein. It's like I've changed how I've eaten, but like I don't really like tell people because it's like literally a couple weeks ago I was telling someone that I eat eggs and bacon every morning now, and they're like, you eat eggs every day? Like they weren't even concerned about the bacon, they were like concerned about the eggs, or like cholesterol, whatever. And so what you hear, I'm curious your take on this. You'll hear sometimes people say, well, my doctor says I can't eat red meat, or that's a big one, or eggs, especially like meat or red meat. I got to stay off that. Knowing how important these things are and how like nutrient dense eggs are, like how do you feel when you hear like my doctor says to avoid these things if you're saying it's so good for us?
Yeah, I usually have to bite my tongue because there are few and far between, people who have really genetically high cholesterol that are at some level of danger with it. But again, when you start unpacking the research and realizing that honestly, people that have very, very low cholesterol are at higher risk of a problem than people that are in what is today considered to be a high range. That's where, again, they've done a really, really good job of kind of pushing this narrative. And like you said, everybody's aware of it. Everybody's heard eggs are bad for you, red meat's bad for you. And unfortunately, there's nothing to distinguish, even on like a lot of the research that's out there, that these like red meat is bad for you. They're not delineating between McDonald's cheeseburgers and grass-fed beef. Like they're also not distinguishing between, are you having the fry alongside the cheeseburger? So, when they say red meat eaters have a higher risk of cancer and things like that, there's nothing that to this point has done a great job of showing what else are they eating and, how much processed food is alongside of that. And that's where I think they've been able to do a really good job of kind of pushing the narrative the way it is right now. But in kind of relation to the, what you said about doctors and pushing that idea on patients is, I guess the downside of that is it's very similar to what I experienced in physical therapy school as it is for, MDs, is their nutrition exposure is very minimal. So they're told a very specific ideology related to nutrition, and it's not necessarily their fault, but it's just what's been kind of pushed on them. And because they don't have a strong enough foundation themselves, they're just going to regurgitate that information onto their patients as, yeah, this is what's causing this. And we've been told cholesterol is the issue, and a way to control cholesterol is red meat and decreasing egg consumption. And so at the end of the day, one of the things that really pushes me and why, I'm trying my best to kind of get a clear message out, or a more, just transparent message out, is that I just want people to be educated consumers. And I'm not saying that everything that I say is, the Bible or anything like that. It's just that I feel like, we all as individuals need to be advocating for our own health and understanding that we need to get more information and then figure out what's the best decision based on my current health status and where should I be going from there. And then that allows you to go into your doctor and have a more informed conversation. And I always say, like, if you can have an open conversation with your doctor and they can be answering questions and they're open to that conversation, then you're in a pretty good spot. But if you immediately go in there and start to ask a couple questions and you get pushback, it tells me they're not necessarily either wanting to have that conversation, or they're not happy with you challenging, their status, so to speak. And I think that's a dangerous game to play when we as individuals don't even have the ability to advocate for our own health.
Yeah. So just to encourage people, why should they eat eggs if they're nervous about this?
Yeah, so there's very little to support that your dietary intake of cholesterol actually has an impact on increasing your overall cholesterol. So, when you can, and the other piece of this too, and this is what will be interesting here in the decades to come, is we've seen this very strong increase in things like Alzheimer's and dementia. And cholesterol is a protective mechanism for the brain. It is basically protecting that blood-brain barrier. And so if we're not supporting cholesterol and allowing that natural protective mechanism to exist, because we're taking statins and we're minimizing as much cholesterol as we possibly can, then I think again we're going to probably see here in the decades to come that there's some kind of a distinction or a connection between these increases that we're seeing in a lot of these degenerative diseases of the brain, and lowering cholesterol. And the other thing about it is eggs are some of the most nutrient dense things we can eat. I was talking about beef earlier, but eggs are jam packed with nutrients. You could argue it's basically nature's multivitamin when we're eating quality eggs. So there's a lot of things that we're not necessarily getting in our diet, and eggs can be a great way to make sure that a lot of those basic foundational things that our body functions off of, that we have access to them to be able to then build hormones effectively. And we've been talking so much about protein, and it's not just about building muscle. It's about supporting our system to be able to be healthy. And that's where that nutrient density of eggs really come in.
Yeah. So, I want to make this start to get a little practical here. I want to say as a side note, I want to talk about like your Twitter strategy is awesome. So Chris Boettcher, it'll be in the show notes. So if you're like interested in more, definitely give Chris a follow. One of the things you really do though is like you're very practical on Twitter, and you talk a little bit about like how to take control of your health in 90 days. This is one of the first things. I think I started following you a few months ago, and I was like, oh, this is so helpful. So I know this is like abbreviated, but if someone's like, hey, I'm not feeling the best, I'm not physically in the best place, how would you say go from here and like in 90 days, take control of your health? What are some things you'd encourage them to do?
Yeah. So again, I'm going to repeat what I said earlier on getting, increasing your protein intake, kind of writing out what are you doing right now and where do I have opportunities to get to at least that 30 grams of protein with each meal, and putting breakfast and lunch a bit on autopilot, so to speak. Then I would say cutting back on liquid calories. Those are the hidden calories that just don't really serve us very well. So, whether that's fruit juices, your Starbucks Frappuccinos, and then of course alcohol. Is if we can cut a lot of that stuff out, you could think about those types of things as almost like sugar IVs. They're just going to cause large blood sugar spikes very quickly. And that's not conducive to controlling calories or to teaching our body how to burn fat and to kind of get ourselves back on track. And then to go along with that on the activity side, I'd just say start walking. Whatever your current step count is, figure out where your baseline is, even if it's something low like 2,000 or 3,000 a day, and see if you can commit to bumping that up, 3,000. Again, you hear 10,000 steps a day, and while that might be fantastic, that would be great for each of us to be able to pull off day after day, because there is no real upper boundary on where steps stop helping us. But if you're at 2,000 a day and somebody tells you to walk 10,000, that's going to feel like almost insurmountable. So it's all about stacking habits and doing it. Even if you can commit to an extra 20 minutes a day, that's an extra 2,000 to 2,500 steps that you can probably knock out. So how do you move the needle and get some momentum going? And then the last thing I'll add in is adding in some resistance training. So, again, I come from an endurance sports world, and certainly, love to get out on the bike, love to run, but there's nothing from a longevity standpoint that really matches up to, 2 or 3 days a week of quality resistance training. And so being able to kind of get it, get a 30, 35, 40-minute session in a couple times a week, because as we're trying to move the needle, if we can be adding a little bit of muscle mass, that becomes kind of that metabolic fuel to keep things moving in the right direction. And you think about what it's doing to support your joints, and it just encourages movement. And the stronger you feel, the better you feel like you look in the mirror. It continues to kind of cascade from there, to build more and more of that snowball effect,
Yep.
to keep encouraging progress.
So I want to talk about this exercise. Before we do, you also mentioned, liquid calories. Obviously, drinking more water is best. Where are you at in terms of like the goal? I mean, some people are like got these like 2 gallon jugs of water, and like I got to drink 3 of these a day, and like to where like I don't drink any water. Where do you think is a good healthy range to shoot for?
Yeah, again, the gallon side of things really simplifies it, but I think that's a bit for most people. You don't need to be drinking a gallon a day. I think it'd be fine if you aim for that, but I think for most people, if you're aiming for like 75 to 80 ounces, assuming you're not a super active person who's sweating most of the day. This time of year, the winter months, we're not really sweating as much. Again, maybe you're every once in a while, you're getting in a cardio session in the gym, you're doing some extra sweating. There's no downside of increasing on the hydration, but I think 70 to 80 ounces would get people moving in the right direction for sure. Another one of those things that kind of just analyzing how are you getting in your fluids throughout the day. I personally just like keeping a water bottle at the desk and having a bit of a goal of, can I get in, a 20 or 30 ounce bottle before lunch? Can I get one in between lunch and at the end of my workday? And that's going to kind of set us up a lot better than I haven't drank much all day long, and now I'm going to just pound fluids from 5 o'clock to bedtime. And again, the body's going to do a much better job of hydrating when we're drinking a little bit at a time throughout the day, as opposed to trying to play catch up very quickly over a
Right.
couple hours.
Yeah, that's good. I'm also curious too when it comes to like eating. Your advice when it comes to cutoff time, like how late in the day should you eat? Should you not eat? And then like how do you deal with hunger if you like try to take some more breaks?
Yeah, so again, it really does depend on the individual. For some people, they start their day very early, and the only way for them to be able to really control that first meal is to get it in pretty early. So, for someone who maybe has their first meal already at like 6:30 or 7 o'clock in the morning, there's certainly an advantage of, not trying to eat at 9 p.m. and having that really long extended eating window, where yeah, it could be advantageous to try to be done with your dinner by 5:30 or 6 o'clock, and then you still give yourself at least 12-hour break till the next morning, that kind of a thing. But for other people, they wake up and they're not hungry in the morning, and maybe you work from home and you have a little bit more of an opportunity to push off that first meal until 9:30, 10 o'clock, when you start to get hungry and you can still prioritize protein. So I guess as far as like the eating window goes, I'm a little bit, I just really like to take it on an individual level, as opposed to say you can't start eating until 10 a.m. and you got to be done eating by 6 p.m. That just can set some people up for failure. And that's where like intermittent fasting it's a single tool. It can work, but it's not a one size fits all approach. And so again, kind of getting back to your original question, I think it comes down to your schedule. And yeah, ideally we shouldn't be eating right before we go to bed, assuming that our goals are, trying to lose some weight and things like that. So that's where, maybe you are eating your typical dinner, and then, utilizing something like a yogurt bowl as your dessert, so to speak, where you can kind of get that sweet fix. I like keeping, things like cut up vegetables and like a Greek yogurt ranch or something like that I can sort of use as a bit of a snack to fill the void if I'm still looking for something that has a bit of a crunch, later on in the evening. But in general, yeah, our sleep quality is going to be better. It's going to support our metabolism if we're, cutting it off hour and a half, 2 hours for sure before we go to bed.
And why is that?
It's just like it gets back to like that rest and digest. So if our body is having to digest food while we try to sleep, then we're not really getting into that true like restful state, because there's still a lot of energy being devoted to that overall digestion. So if we can kind of give our body a couple of hours to process things while we're awake, then the overall quality of our sleep should be quite a bit better.
That makes sense. Now, I want to talk about this. You've done 10 Ironman competitions. Now, the good news is you're not telling people they need to compete in an Ironman to get healthy. But can you explain what an Ironman is, and then how in the world you've done 10 of them?
Yeah, so it's a triathlon. It's a long distance triathlon. So it's a 2.4 mile swim, a 112 mile bike, and then a marathon, 26.2 mile run at the end. And the best thing I can say, the reason that how I did it was a bit of young foolishness. And I had a buddy of mine who we finished up our senior year of track and convinced me to sign up for one. And I had a break between undergrad and graduate school of about 6 months, so it was a perfect window to just do foolish 22-year-old things. And yeah, I mean, I was kind of got hooked after my first one. Let's just put it that way, and
Yeah.
spent a number of years after that, committed to the process. And yeah, again, it was one of those things that I'm not sure now if somebody would have told me, let's do one. But back in the day, it sounded like a good idea, and kind of here we are. But it taught me so much about life, so much about health, and just being able to kind of have that inner perseverance, that I think has helped me to get where I am today.
Yeah. So speaking of exercise, again, you've already mentioned one of the big problems I think people have is like, I'm just going to start exercising, but they don't change how they eat, so they don't experience any progress. But obviously, big deal. I guess to start, can you just like explain, such encourage why exercise is important, and like what it does for the body?
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, we were made to move. So, as humans, we are extremely efficient movers, and that might seem a little bit counterintuitive today because we do so much sitting that we've almost created this society that discourages it or makes it very, very challenging to be moving on a consistent basis. But the reality is this is what we're made for. We're here to be moving very, very efficiently. And so I would say, even something as simple as walking, what that does for us from a stress standpoint, again, getting outside, getting some fresh air, just disconnecting from kind of the busyness of life, even if it doesn't do anything for us on the physical side, what it's doing on our mental health side is then going to kind of pour into just improving our overall physical health as well. And then, yeah, again, you're going and you're trying to move the body, what that does to increase circulation. I talked about strength training earlier where, of course, if we're trying to build muscle and increase a stimulus on that muscle to encourage it to build more, that's just fueling our metabolism. And then, utilizing the walking in between to be able to help us with recovery. So again, you kind of have a good workout, you slightly tear down the muscle. Now you're walking, taking that typical daily walk. That's helping you recover from your workouts so that the next day you go in the gym and you do another lift, you're ready to go again. Your body's kind of primed because you've really focused on that recovery. So it's you could kind of go on for probably an hour here just talking about the benefits of exercise. But it really just comes back to, trying to improve overall metabolic health and, increasing blood flow, increasing perfusion to the brain, and how that all kind of works together.
So making this somewhat practical. I mean, obviously, people can be like really healthy, work out really into it, but a lot of people, even as you mentioned, like you and your brother around the COVID times, like you kind of get discouraged. Maybe you have the gym membership, but you don't really go. And again, it's season of life experience. I know that makes this somewhat hard to answer, but like generally speaking, like someone's like, "Hey, I got a gym membership. Like, how often should I go? And like, what should I be doing? What are my targets? What would you encourage?"
Yeah, so I think in general, we usually encourage people I mentioned the strength side of things where it's like, if you can only get in the gym twice a week, then doing the same routine twice a week is going to give you a lot more results than going in 3 or 4 times one week and then nothing the following week or once the following week. It's important to get at least two stimuluses on the muscle every week. So that's where, maybe it's a 45-minute routine, full body workout twice a week, and you just stay really consistent with that. You're going to see some decent results, just doing that. And then, yeah, if you had the time and the energy and you wanted to commit to a third day of that same routine, great. That can certainly add some benefits to it. But again, if your time constraints and your schedule just limits that, whatever you can be the most consistent with is going to be again, that's what we're going to kind of push people to. So we have some people that are working out twice a week with strength. We have some people that they want to be in the gym doing something almost every day. So maybe it is they're doing 3 or 4 lifts and they're doing 1 or 2 cardio sessions in between. Like there's a balance that can be had there. It's just a matter of what does your schedule allow for, and committing to that minimal time commitment first, building some consistency, and then if the schedule allows for it, and again, as you build momentum, I always find it's so much easier for people to start committing more energy to it because they feel better. So, they've seen the benefits of 2 days a week and they're like, well, what could a third day do for me? What could a fourth day do for me? And so that's where, you start off small and just allow those wins to continue to build for you. But I was just going to say, like, as far as like a full body routine, I generally, if you're not used to being in the gym and you have access to gym, the machine lifts are a great place to start because, being able to utilize something like a leg press or a seated chest press, a seated rowing machine, those are going to help us to target those muscles in a very safe way. And because it only allows you to move in a certain range of motion, you can, kind of build good technique and good form without having to use, I think dumbbells can be great. That can be a great option for like a home routine. And there's ways to really leverage that in a very small area, very efficiently. But if you're kind of, you want to go to the gym, utilizing the machines early on is probably a good starting point. And then I would just encourage people to try to create some balance where, you're focused on a couple of pushing motions, something like chest press and overhead press, and pulling motions. So something like a lat pull down and a seated row, and then being able to continue to work your legs. So I mentioned like a leg press machine, being able to do like leg extension or hamstring curls. Like that's going to give you a pretty balanced routine right there. And that's, 7 movements that are going to target probably 90% of the large muscles you have right there. And then as you get more comfortable, you work through some of that original soreness, and you can start kind of getting into some of the maybe more complicated movements, a body, a squat or some kind of a Russian deadlift, that kind of a thing, which those can be, especially when you throw the word like deadlift and squat out, you immediately picture someone standing under 300 pounds of weight, and it's a little bit overwhelming. So that's where I like the machines early on to be able to build some confidence that you can kind of get into some of those other movements.
So yeah, that's super helpful because you heard too. Like you also, I'm curious how you advise this. So you also could do like muscle groups, like chest and tries, back and bis that work together. Generally speaking, if someone's going to say, "Hey, all right, I'm going to go to the gym twice a week," are you saying I should do a full body workout each time, or should I focus on certain muscle groups each time? But if I'm only going twice a week, I guess you're saying like, should I just do those 7 exercises? Is that what you'd recommend, or what would you do if you're going twice a week? How would you?
That would be my bias. If you're only going twice a week, you want to make sure you're hitting those muscles twice. And the only way for you to do that is to do the same routine. And generally you're going to, especially if you're kind of that newbie, so to speak, you're going to get what we always call the newbie gains, where if you haven't had a stimulus on the muscle for a while, if you can do that same routine twice a week, you're going to see a lot of progress rather quickly because it's a brand new stimulus for the muscle. And that's where it's going to be more advantageous for you to do the same routine, full body work, twice a week than it is to, am I doing chest day? Am I doing back day? Am I doing legs day? Because again, how long is it going to take you to get back to, if you're doing like a chest, a back, and a legs, you're probably only going to hit your legs, once every other week.
Right.
And that's not really going to lead to a whole lot of progress there.
Okay. Yeah, that's super helpful. That's super great. Now, I'm curious too, like, so we got exercise, we talk about working out. Or the eating, if somebody wants to lose weight, what are like the easiest low hanging fruits? Maybe I know we've probably talked about them, but like, hey, I've been struggling, I want to take some weight off. For sustainability wise, what would you say they should focus on?
Yeah, I guess I'd double down on what I mentioned earlier is liquid calories, just trying to decrease those liquid calories, prioritizing a lot more protein with each of your meals, and then increasing the walking would probably be where I'd start. And then as you have the bandwidth for it, get in the gym a couple times a week with like a full body routine from there. Those would be, again, it's not overly complicated. That's what, that's really kind of our focus is simplifying health, simplifying these actions that we can take to get some momentum going. And again, for the average person, there's plenty of opportunity to kind of start with those low hanging fruits and then kind of build on that, as opposed to, worrying about things like supplements, for instance, which can have some advantages at some point, but for the vast majority of people, they just create a bit of confusion, and you can't supplement your way to a better diet. You have to make the nutritional changes first and then allow those supplements to help us on the backside.
So, two things I didn't hear you mention. Um, I know this is, I'm not trying to be controversial, but there's like Ozempic, there's no like injection. You didn't talk about injections. And you also didn't really talk about calories. So can you mention that? I think so many people that are used to weight loss are like, I got to count my calories, but you didn't say like, that's where you should start. So why not?
Yeah, let me be clear here. There can be advantages to counting calories. However, I don't see how, given my responsibilities as a dad, with everything I've got going on as a business owner as well, there is no way I'm counting calories for more than a couple of days before I'm like, this sucks. And that's what we hear from the vast majority of people is they don't want to do it. It's not an easy thing. I shouldn't say that. It's not a difficult thing to do, but it takes time and it takes energy day after day to do it. And
Right.
so again, if you're a 25-year-old gym bro with no responsibilities, you can count every calorie you take in. You can go through all these different phases of your bulk phase, your cut phase, all this stuff that you see so much about. But for the average person, they just want to be healthy. And if we
Yeah.
can teach people how to be healthy based on prioritizing protein, understanding the protein to calorie ratio. Now we're talking about satiety. We're not talking about calorie counting. So basically eating foods that are going to naturally control calories all on their own, just because we're choosing foods that are going to keep us full. And that's going to allow us to steer clear of those empty calories in the middle of the day, going to the pantry at 4 o'clock in the afternoon and eating pretzels or chips and salsa, the things that really just add up very quickly. So it's like if our meals can be built around these quality protein sources and we're keeping the carb portion under control and we're building out our meals, day after day in an effective way, the calories take care of themselves. And,
Yeah.
there's always ways to kind of turn on some additional calorie burn. Again, like if you get into a routine and your meals are in a good spot and you feel like you hit a little bit of a plateau, well, let's go hit an extra 2,500 steps a day. And let's do that for a couple of weeks. And usually that's enough to like get things moving again. So it
Yeah.
becomes less about counting every calorie and it becomes just understanding how to build a lifestyle and how there's opportunities to always continue to move the needle if we have those tools available to us.
Yeah. I think it's too, just like history is helpful. Like obesity, how we see it today, has skyrocketed in the last 50 years. Before that, people weren't really counting calories. They just weren't having these really unhealthy foods shoved down their face. They were eating more real whole foods. And so the calories took care of themselves because they're eating things that, were actually better for their bodies.
That's exactly
For
right.
example.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more.
I'm just curious too with the protein. Like I think you mentioned a little bit like protein shakes. If someone's like, hey, to get enough protein a day, do you recommend those, or do you think those are helpful? Or
Yeah, I think they can be useful. Again, you think about something like whey protein is actually one of the most bioavailable protein sources. So our body digests it very effectively, and we can put it to use very well. The one thing I will say about utilizing protein shakes all the time is for some people they don't give as much satiety because it is kind of in a bit of a liquid form. So for some people, there's no problem. They can use that as a breakfast or a lunch, but then, they kind of get to the mid morning or they get to the mid afternoon and they're a little bit more hungry. So if you notice that you're not getting great satiety from those shakes, then you may want to find more of like a whole foods approach to it with, yeah, eggs and things like that to try to give yourself some more fullness throughout the day so that you're not using that protein shake and then almost turning it into like a 4 meal approach because it's not keeping you full throughout the day.
yeah, that's helpful. Now I do want to mention again X, Twitter. You're crushing on there. I just want to like talk about like how you schedule manage that. I mean, you do this like really highly practical stuff. You got the tweet threads going on. What's your approach to social media, and how do you like you schedule plan it out?
Yeah, so I try to have like a little bit of a game plan going in and at the end of the day, like something that's sustainable too. So, we have a lot of other things that we're doing besides Twitter. So, kind of looking at trying to provide some high value threads and Again, the interesting part too about Twitter is, there's a very small percentage of your audience that is actually seeing most of your messages.
Hmm.
So one of
Right.
the things that was really helpful for me early on was realizing that it's okay to be putting out similar content. You share something and then 3 or 4 months later, it's okay to put that out there again, because there's probably only a few percentage of people that are seeing it for a second time.
Right.
And they also can benefit from seeing the same message. I mean, I'm sure that, there's times in my life where the first time I heard it and I was like, oh, that's a good idea, but then I forgot about it. So sometimes we got to like hammer home the most important pieces. And so, I was a little bit gun shy of saying the same things over and over again. But at the end of the day, if we can just take, the most important messages and kind of hammer people with them, that's going to allow them to hopefully stay focused on,
Yeah.
those biggest levers, as opposed to just distracting themselves with a few other things. So
Yeah.
I guess in relation to like the scheduling side of things, yeah, there's some different resources out there that you can use to like schedule it ahead. Like, again, you go on vacation or whatever, and I don't really want to be tweeting all day and trying to worry about writing threads when I'm with my family. So a
Right.
lot of times you can kind of schedule it out and have some of that stuff, set up for you going into some time where you can disconnect. Because I think that's
Right.
important too. Is
Yeah.
it's a long, it's a grind a bit online, and being able to disconnect and not worry about it every once in a while still having some content go out is really
Right.
useful.
Yeah. So I'm just curious if you want to share like kind of what you're up to these days. 90 days to life. If I'm saying that wrong, correct me. But kind of like, what are you doing these days, and how are you helping people?
Yeah, so for the last couple of years, Brett and I have been mostly doing almost all one-on-one coaching. So a lot of individual coaching where, we're working with guys day in and day out. And, we recognize that like we were helping people, but there were a lot of people who are just not necessarily ready to take that big leap into one-on-one coaching. So like, how could we figure out how to help people who wanted quality information, needed some support, but just weren't really ready to commit to, that day-to-day piece of things. So Brett and I spent 6 months building out our 90 to life course. And so it's literally action-packed modules. We provide step-by-step guidance on a lot of the things we talked about today with autopilot meals and, how are we measuring progress? What are we doing in the gym? Kind of building all that stuff out. So we put that into our course community, and we launched 90 to Life about a week and a half ago. And we've got over 200 people in there already, and we're continuing to basically provide challenges for people. So we've got like a gym accountability thing rolling this week where, people are checking in, kind of holding each other accountable. We're creating a bit of a leaderboard, and we're doing some giveaways, week after week with that. So it's fun. You're kind of surrounding yourself with like-minded people. And then, we have all that actionable information that's in there. And then Brett and I are doing, at least one a week, kind of a Q&A call, or, getting into some topics that, things like cholesterol, what some people just kind of trying to figure out how to make sense of that kind of stuff. So some of it's Q&A, some of it is just us talking about a lot of these like mainstream health topics, and just trying to steer people in a productive way when it comes to health. So yeah, we're really excited about that. And it's been fun the community piece is something that we've wanted to do for a long time. And we've really found that was a missing link for us. And once we found that community, you get people from all over the country who, you may not necessarily, be able to pat them on the back and say, keep going, but they can see what you're doing. You can see what they're doing. And there's a lot of encouragement that can come out of it. And again, we're already seeing people start to connect on, the personal level, the business level, people in their state that they didn't even realize that they would have an opportunity to connect with. So
Yeah.
we're really pumped about that.
That's great. Well, Chris, I want to ask people where they can go to connect with you, where they can get the course. Before I do, kind of like final question: if people are listening to this in real time, it's January, and so this is the time of the year where they're like, I got to change things, I got to get healthier. Whenever this time of year listen to this, however, like, what's your advice if someone's like, hey, for whatever reason, I'm extra motivated to kind of get on track here. Obviously, a lot of people have goals and then they burn out. So, like, what's your encouragement if someone's like, hey, I want to focus on this more, but also I want to keep doing this more than just like 3 weeks?
Yeah, start small. Again, it kind of goes back to if pull the biggest levers you can pull. So right now, that's going to be your nutrition. and figure out where you can make some adjustments, right away to get that rolling versus I'm going to go commit to my gym membership on January 1st and I'm going to go 5 days a week. If you're going to get a gym membership, I'm not going to discourage that, but maybe you commit to 2 days a week and you focus on trying to move a little bit more throughout your day, because those are things that, again, are going to fuel this process versus burn you out. So nutrition, far and away, 80% of your progress is going to come from that. So figure out where you have opportunities to, create a bit of a system in your life with those first 2 meals and cutting out some of those liquid calories, and just start with that lowest hanging fruit and then build from there, because that's going to allow you to get into February, get into March, when all of your friends have kind of given up and gone back to those old habits, and you end up in a situation where, you're still going. And then the other piece I would add in is find some accountability. If that's somebody local, a friend, a coworker, somebody that you guys can kind of be in the game with. Again, that's part of why we built out 90 to Life as well, is like people didn't necessarily have that locally, and they were looking for that. So, find some level of accountability, whether it's, locally, family member, whatever that might be, so that, on those days where you don't feel like doing it, you can call them up and say, hey, like, let's do this together. And that way, you guys can continue to keep moving things forward.
Yeah, that's great. Well, Chris, this has been super helpful, very practical. If you want to find you online, where can they go?
Yeah, so my brother Brett and I'm at Chris Boettcher 9 on Twitter. We have our school community linked on there, and then our website if you're interested in kind of checking out our personalized coaching. We're at brotheru.com.
All right. And we'll link to all those in the show notes as well, so people can go in there and find that. Chris, thanks for the time. Thanks for what you're doing. This has been really, really great conversation.
Yeah, Dylan, I really appreciate it. Enjoyed it. And hopefully your audience finds a lot of this impactful and something they can take action on.